Welcome to Movie Caps. Today, I will show you an American drama from 2012, based on a true story, titled, Flight. Spoilers ahead. Watch out, and take care. The movie starts with Whip Whitaker, waking up before it's time to take off on a new flight, after an evening of drugs, drinking, and hooking up with one of his flight attendants, Katerina Marquez. As Whip tries to wake himself up from the hangover, he receives a call from his ex-wife Dina, who wants to discuss putting their son through a private school, but Whip is in no mood or condition to discuss this at the moment. He says that he will discuss it when he gets back to Atlanta. While Katerina quickly heads to the airport, Whip is unable to collect himself, until he snorts a line. That wakes him up and he heads to the airport, where it is raining heavily. After doing a quick inspection of the plane, Whip boards it while speaking with a flight attendant named Margaret. He then meets his co-pilot Ken Evans. Ken seems a little apprehensive of Whip. However, Whip tells him that he is alright to fly. The plane takes off through rain, and Whip pushes it higher and faster, attempting to find a break in the clouds. As they take a look at the weather report, Whip asks Ken to report to flight control that they are diverting from their intended path to avoid weather. Whip is finally able to find a break in the storm, the plane stabilizes, and Whip is applauded by the passengers. After some time, Whip speaks to the passengers, and apologizes for the rough ride, as he pours many bottles of vodka into a bottle of orange juice. He then naps as Ken takes control of the plane. On the ground, in a small town in Georgia, a prostitute named Nicole leaves a hotel after a night with a client. She then calls her drug connection. She shows up at the guy's place where a porno film is being shot. There, she buys a small quantity of black pearl. The guy tells her not to shoot too much, because it has not been cut properly. Upon coming home, she finds the building manager in her apartment, who demands the unpaid rent. She kicks him out and slams the door in his face. She takes a hit of the drugs she bought, and passes out. On the other hand, Whip is still fast asleep as Ken monitors the flight. Ken then says to Margaret, that he will have to wake him up in preparation for the landing. This is when a sudden jolt hits the plane, and it suddenly pitches into an uncontrolled dive. The steering mechanism stops responding, and the hydraulics controlling the plane also stop responding. Whip tries to stay calm, and tries out different emergency maneuvers to get the plane under control. He asks Margaret to join him and Ken in the cockpit. After all of his attempts to get the plane under control fail, he tries a crazy maneuver. He rolls the plane, so they are flying inverted, and hopes it will buy them some time to find a safe landing spot. A stewardess named Camilla gets up from her seat, to help some passengers, but gets knocked out when the plane lurches violently. She is pitched onto the ceiling of the cabin when the plane rolls. A young boy then falls out of his seat when the plane rolls over again. Katerina unbuckles herself, lifts the boy back into his seat, and buckles him in. Whip inverts the plane again, leveling out. The plane's wing collides with the church's tower, shearing it off. Whip's head then slams hard into the steering, and he is knocked out. Whip is woken up just enough to see himself being dragged out of the plane by the local parishioners. He also sees that Ken is slumped over in his seat. He is conscious and bleeding severely from his head. Margaret is also bleeding and screaming. Katerina's body lies near Margaret, her head is under a steel plate, and she is presumably dead. Whip wakes up in a hospital, and finds his friend Charlie waiting in his room. He tells Whip that his maneuver saved a lot of lives. However, there were 6 deaths, including Camilla, Katerina, and 4 other passengers. After some time, Harling Mays comes to visit Whip. He brings cigarettes, clothing and some other items from Whip's house. He also tells him that his heroics during the crash have pulled the media outside his house and the hospital. Later, Whip goes into a stairwell to smoke, where he encounters drug addict Nicole, and a cancer patient named Mark. The patient soon realizes who Whip is, and the conversation takes a turn toward whether disasters can be prevented or not. According to Mark, there is no way to stop things from happening. He says that he was meant to get cancer, just as the 3 of them were meant to meet in the stairwell. After Mark leaves, Whip tells Nicole that he would like to see her after they are released from the hospital. She gives him her address. Whip is released after a few days, and Harling sneaks him out of the back door to avoid the press at the front. Because of the media in front of his house, Whip goes to his father's farmhouse in the country. Going around the house, Whip finds many bottles of alcohol, but he empties them all out. Whip refuses to answer any calls, but is surprised when Charlie leaves him a message, asking to meet him after a medical checkup in a few days. Whip gives in to the request, and sits down with Charlie and Hugh Lang, who is a lawyer from Chicago sent by the pilots union. Hugh explains that at the crash site, blood was drawn from Whip, indicating that he had elevated levels of alcohol and drugs in his system. He indicates that Whip is in trouble, as he may face charges of manslaughter, jail time, and the loss of his pilot's license. Later, Whip goes to the address Nicole had given him, and when he gets there, he sees that she is being kicked out of her apartment by the landlord. Whip helps her pay her rent, and offers her to stay with him as she has nowhere to go. Whip continues to avoid the press, but realizes that his reputation could be plagued by the others who are around him. He meets Margaret at Katerina's funeral. Margaret says that she knew Whip was drunk when she encountered him that morning. Whip does not take it well, and tells her that if it wasn't for him, she could have ended up dead as well. After that, Whip goes to the hospital to see Ken. Ken tells him he has not yet spoken to the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, investigating the crash, about their suspicions regarding Whip's condition at the time. Ken knows that Whip was hungover in the cockpit, and that he may have been drunk when the accident occurred. It is possible that Ken might never walk again, but he and his family still believe that his survival was a miracle. Ken and his wife are strictly religious. They ask Whip to pray with them, and he does but reluctantly. On the other hand, Nicole is trying to turn her life around. She gets a job and attends Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. She asks Whip to join her, but he is unable to stomach much of the meeting. Nicole finds him working on a Cessna in his father's garage. He says to her that they can fly away and start over, but his advancements are refused by Nicole. Whip does not take it well, and yells at her as she leaves. Nicole eventually leaves Whip, and his drinking problem grows more and more out of control. The press finally finds the farmhouse, and Whip drives off to the neighborhood, where his ex-wife and son live. Both demand Whip to leave, but he doesn't, and prompts them to call the police. Charlie and Hugh are sick of Whip's behavior, claiming that this does not bode well for their upcoming case with the NTSB. His lawyer has managed to deal with the blood test and alcohol problem, but they still need Whip to present his side of the story to Ellen Block, the woman investigating for the NTSB. They are aware that Block is a fair investigator. Whip finally comes to his senses, and decides to clean up his act. In the next scene, he is escorted to a hotel room. A security guard is stationed at the door. All traces of alcohol have been cleaned out of the mini fridge in the room. Whip attempts to relax, but finds himself unable to go to sleep, or even go over the documents that Hugh has prepared for him. Later, he hears a noise coming from the adjoining room. He goes to the room and sees that the door has been left unlocked. In the room, he finds a fully stocked mini fridge with alcohol. Whip tries to stop himself, but ends up snatching a bottle of vodka. The next day, Charlie and Hugh break into the room. When Whip does not answer the door, they find him passed out on the bathroom floor, with a cut on his head, and empty mini bottles littering the room. The hearing is in a few minutes, so they come up with a bold plan. They call Harling, who gives him the cocaine he needs to get himself going. They make it to the hearing in time. During the hearing, it is determined that the cause of the accident was a damaged jack screw in the tail section, that had not been repaired a few years prior. The jack screw forced the tail stabilizer into a down position, which caused the accident. The revelation exonerates Whip, but Ellen brings up the findings of 2 empty mini vodka bottles, in one of the trash cans near the pilot's cabin. Whip's lawyer has already taken care of Whip's blood tests and the drug problem. Now, there is only one other member left, who could have potentially drunk those bottles of vodka. Due to having a history with drugs and drinking problems, Katerina is the other suspect. Ellen asks if Whip is aware of Katerina's history. Whip says he does not know much about her. Upon being asked if he thinks Katerina is the one who drank vodka, Whip hesitates, before confessing that he is the one who drank those bottles. Charlie and Hugh attempt to quell Whip's words, but he confesses to his alcohol problems, saying that he is drunk at the moment, and has taken cocaine also. After the hearing, we see Whip telling the story to a group of prisoners, explaining about his confession, and how it seemed the NTSB hearing was his breaking point. He couldn't tell another lie, he was just done with lying. 13 months later, Whip is looking at pictures of Nicole, family and friends on the wall of his cell, along with greeting cards congratulating him on his first anniversary of being sober. He is working to rebuild his relationship with his son, who visits to speak with him about a college application essay he's working on. It's about the most fascinating person that I've never met. His son begins by asking, "Who are you?" As a plane flies overhead, Whip replies, "That's a good question." The end. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this. Turn on the notifications and leave a like to help the channel out.